Hi everyone, this is Brian and this is my practice evaluation project. It was completed on a Riding the Wave program developed, a 10-week stress and anger management group. It was co-facilitated and developed by myself and Dan Brewer at an LMHC working with the Suquamish Tribe Wellness Center. It was voluntary, it was open to the community, it was free to attend. So as we set out on the development of this thing, one of the first things that Dan and I both kind of wanted to focus on was this idea of non-judgment and kind of looking at anger as an adaptive response to adversity. So in the face of adversity, anger can mobilize physical and psychological resources, energize behaviors for corrective action, and facilitate perseverance. So in a kind of a tribal or reservation setting, the types of adversity that we're talking about are, childhood abuse, relational trauma, sexual assault, and domestic violence. And a lot of times anger is exactly the right way to react to these sorts of things. And it's a helpful or even kind of survival promoting thing at first. Kathy Kinsey, when she was doing her doctoral work last year, she actually found that reconciling this anger, that kind of understanding its origin and finding purpose in it, is actually an important part of meaning making and of psychological well-being for people in the community. So we knew kind of right up front that anger was going to be this complicated thing, and it was going to need to be approached in an empathetic and nuanced way. So for the kind of the structure, the foundation of the group, we started with DBT, and it's been found to be an effective intervention for the reduction of anger and aggression. And through Kinsey's work, it's also an empirically supported intervention in the Suquamish community. So we utilized this format of co-facilitated psychoeducational skill groups, and we borrowed some from kind of the major tenets of DBT, being mindfulness, emotional regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness. And we found that DBT's focus on practically applicable skills, like the sort of things that a client can walk away from a group and use, was really kind of helpful for a kind of a brief, concise intervention. We also brought in some stuff from MBSR, and this was kind of expanding on some of the mindfulness elements of DBT. And this is one of Dan's real strengths in the group. And he used guided meditations, increasing awareness and body scanning, and then kind of looking at this idea of incorporating mindfulness and awareness into our everyday activities, just trying to be more attentive to our internal experiences. And this is supported in literature for behavioral inhibition, so kind of slowing down reactions and decreasing stress reactivity. So hopefully kind of taking the peak off of the emotional reaction. So while I didn't find anything directly related to anger, both of those things seem like pretty appropriate to an anger management intervention. And we brought in stuff from interpersonal family systems theory, which it's not a well-tested theory. It doesn't have a lot of representation in the literature, but it's philosophically consistent with DBT, and really kind of what I saw this as being is something that kind of expanded on DBT's idea of an invalidating environment. And it's a framework that's really easy to present and understand in a brief amount of time, and it allowed us to cover a really broad range of developmental issues in a concise manner. And also it gives a nice illustration of how things that were kind of once adaptive can become maladaptive as time goes on. So we kind of were able to come up with this outline here, and this was always meant to be something that could change if kind of indicated by the client system, but we wanted to walk into the group with a plan. And it was also really important to make sure that we were bringing a skill to each session. And this concept of active or kind of participatory learning was found to be an important element to the success of mindfulness-based interventions. So with kind of the intervention in place, we got to meet our client system. And we had 7 people show up, and 6 of those 7 stayed with it, which was pretty exciting for us. That's pretty high level of retention for these groups, at least kind of given our experience in the setting. And it was a really kind of diverse and interesting group. We had a married couple, we had a mother and a daughter, we had a couple young men, and we had an elder woman from the community. And all told, it was 5 of Native American descent and 2 white, ages from 25 to about 57. Broad range of socioeconomic, professional, kind of treatment and therapy history was also very diverse. So it was a cool group to work with, and they actually got a pretty good bond together as we went on. In our first session, it kind of asked us questions. So, I mean, why are you here? What is it that you hope to achieve kind of from participating in this? And without kind of getting into a lot of detail and reading this through, it really boiled down to 4 kind of major topics. And those were emotional coping, interpersonal and family conflict, and internal psychological processes, and and lack of resources, which translated into the following problem statements. And I'm going to take it from the bottom and work my way up. And so the client system becomes frustrated by a lack of resources and finding themselves in situations where they're reliant on others. And kind of in our setting, we actually have a lot of kind of direct aid and kind of resources for the clients. And we didn't want to kind of be in a place where we were doubling up on some of those services. And we also kind of didn't feel that we were necessarily the best kind of milieu for that anyway. So we kind of set that one aside. For 2 and 3, the client system is distressed, at least in part, due to unresolved conflict and significant interpersonal relationships, and internal psychological processes are amplifying distress, whether it be intrusive thinking errors or a lack of understanding of one's core emotional experience. These were ones where we didn't feel that we necessarily had the foundation with some of these clients, and we also didn't want to put ourselves in a position where we were trying to take on too complex a problem in a short amount of time. So we knew that we would touch on these things, and we certainly wanted to kind of make sure that we incorporated this into our intervention, but we didn't really have the expectation of kind of complete resolution to those. The first problem, though, this client system does not presently have the skills and knowledge necessary to cope with difficult and/or intense emotions like stress and anger. This is kind of spot on to what we were hoping to achieve with the intervention. So this really kind of easily became our target problem. And to break it back out, what that really meant is that the stuff that the people were doing in the group, it just wasn't working. In fact, a lot of times it was making things worse, and it almost was never making them feel better, at least in the medium and long term. And those are things like substance use, isolation, explosion. That there was a real almost phobia of intense emotions that went through the group. We see a lot more of the anger in characteristics rather than the anger out. We had kind of bottlers and stuffers. And so kind of getting more comfortable with an emotional experience we knew would need to be an objective of the group. And the group kind of walked in with this desiring something new. And what a cool place to start, right? We kind of, on week 1, we've got people saying, you know what I'm doing isn't really working and I want something different. So right then and there, we've got people in kind of that preparation action stage, and we're all kind of ready to go. So that was pretty exciting for us. And you can see these kind of really easily translate into objectives. And into goals. So through the use of skills developed in the group process, the clients need to become increasingly aware, confident, and effective in coping with difficult, intense emotions. And we're going to track this with a weekly emotional scaling, and then also kind of a check-in, kind of qualitative analysis in each weekly group. We gave about 15 to 20 minutes of that. And then the client's going to develop skills for managing stressors and intense emotions in a constructive manner. And we measure this with weekly tracking of self-reported skill use over the course of the intervention. So for measurement tools, I actually developed these first 2 measurement tools myself, for better or worse. The good news is this kind of allowed us to really connect the measurement to the client's experience. And this one, for example, the unhealthy coping behaviors and the healthy coping activities, all those activities actually came from kind of a brainstorm session that we done in group. So they were able to so this is really kind of connected to their experience, which is kind of a cool thing. And builds a little bit of kind of connection to the measurement process. And then the use of skills, the one at the bottom, is that's the stuff that we were introducing in the group as we went. And with this, the measurement was really simple. It's just, how many times? Occurrence in the past week. So with a brief weekly emotional scaling, this one was not as successful, and this kind of shows my own inexperience in developing these sort of things. And we're collecting the peak experience of anger or anxiety, and other emotions, and also the number of days in the past week where there was a negative emotion experience of greater than 5, kind of agitated per the scale. And this was not a very successful measurement tool. It was measuring the weekly peak was just too imprecise and susceptible to history effects. And without specifying the particular negative emotion, that second one was just kind of too general to really provide helpful data. And so those were done at the beginning of each session, starting in week 5 and going through week 10, so 6 total measurements. And also as kind of a pre and post, we used the Novico Anger Scale, our part B of that, and yeah, so that was kind of our pre and post test. And the intervention went great. The reported issues and identified goals were consistent with our planned objectives of the group, so we didn't have to make a lot of major changes to our outline. The retention was great. That was kind of an exciting outcome for us. This is not the first time we've tried this kind of intervention. This is the first time that I've done it myself and that we've kind of taken this specific approach. But in the past, we've had really low response and even lower retention. So to see kind of a solid group show up and stay with it was kind of a cool outcome in and of itself for us. The qualitative feedback we received from the client system was consistently positive. And in terms of findings, like I said, this brief weekly emotional scaling was just it didn't give us a lot of good information and not any kind of conclusive findings coming out of it either. By only tracking the weekly peaks, it was just too susceptible to confounding variables. So this would, and also the kind of measuring reactive emotions like anger, anxiety, the score is less useful outside of the context. So for both of those kind of issues, we could see a score go from a 2 to an 8, and that could be a sign of trouble, or it could just be a sign that there was almost no stressors in the first week, and then everything piled up in the second week, and they were just doing everything they could do to cope with it. So without kind of that coupling of both kind of the peak emotional experience and the antecedent to that experience, it wasn't kind of real helpful information. With the coping behaviors and skill use, I think we got a little bit better data. And what we're looking at here is the negative coping behaviors is the blue line, and we're looking for that to kind of be trending downward. And then the healthy coping behaviors and skill use, the orange and gray, hopefully for those to be trending upward. And you can see that top left, that's exactly what we're looking for. And obviously not all of them kind of follow that pattern, but we do kind of get some good news when we actually aggregate the data here. The healthy coping behaviors, that orange line is kind of inconsistent. We don't get a significant pattern out of that. The negative coping behaviors, however, we do kind of we see what we want to see, which is basically starting low and staying low. One of the big problems here is that we didn't start measurement until week 5, so it looks like a lot of that stuff had kind of been extinguished over the course of the first few weeks of the intervention. So really what we're hoping to do at this point is just maintain that low line, and we were successful with that. And the skill use, that gray line, actually shows kind of a nice trend upward. And that kind of supports the efficacy of the intervention. And with the pre and post on the Novico, we get some more good news here. You can see all 6 who were present for the pre and post showed a reduction in scores, with the average reduction actually being almost 16. It didn't quite rise to the level of statistical significance, but it's still kind of promising and something to be optimistic about. And you can see in the chart to the right, I mean, the blue scores being that pre-test, and the orange bars being the post-test. You can see a good solid trend downwards there. In terms of limitations, so the measurement tools need to be revised, particularly the emotional scaling measure. The instruction for completion of weekly surveys kind of evolved or changed over the course of the intervention, going back to this idea that it wasn't something I had a lot of experience with, so now I kind of know that I need to have my script from the beginning. And the Novico was useful in demonstrating change, but actually stress reactivity would probably be a better match to the kind of the intervention target, so we might switch over to that. And in this case, our first measurement occurred in week 5, so we didn't have an actual baseline. So really this was effectively kind of a B-only intervention, which is obviously kind of our least valid approach. We're able to kind of reconstruct some of the baseline stuff with the problem identification, but we didn't have any kind of quantitative data from early in the intervention. So in terms of changes, obviously that's at the top of the list, is making sure that we get kind of a good baseline early, kind of first session, so we know kind of from where we're working. And we also would want to introduce some of the weekly measurement earlier in the intervention. More precise emotional scaling, likely kind of getting to a daily log and something that would need to be completed at home, which would kind of switch things up. But I think the kind of the commitment and interest that we saw from this time through suggests that we could actually have some pretty good follow through with the at-home logs. And we're probably, just based on the feedback we got from the clients, going to try to extend the intervention out a few weeks, and a lot of that is just to kind of give the information that we went over a little bit more space to kind of breathe and allow the clients to kind of absorb it a little bit more. So thank you guys for staying with me. Certainly appreciate any feedback, and have a good day or good night.